Thank you all for being here this morning, and welcome to the Capitol building and to the Senate. Certainly glad to have with me today Senator Lonnie Paxton. I'm glad to have him, Senator A.J. Griffin, and Senator Stephanie Bice. Whenever we talk about our budget in the state of Oklahoma, it is a very complex, a very challenging issue, as we all know. To add to that are term limits and State Question 640. And so as we have times change, but we have new legislators that come in and not really looking back at some of our past. And so when we talk about what we're going to talk about today, if we go back in time, and some of you have been here a long time, back to 2008, 2009, we were doing the very thing we're talking about this morning. The budget issues, as I said, are important and challenging not only to the agencies, but they're also very challenging to taxpayers that are out there. Our goal is to have an efficient government that funds core programs adequately. And to do that, I believe, and we believe, that it is beneficial to have collaboration between the agencies and the legislators. And legislators and agencies, of course, have different roles. And over the last few years, because of the financial situation in Oklahoma, some agencies have been cut 30% or more in their appropriations. At the same time, it is very noteworthy that while there are some core services that must be addressed, that the agencies are not the ones out who are knocking doors, who are attending the town hall meetings, who are listening to their constituents. The agencies listen to those who are consuming whatever services that they have to offer, and those are valuable services. And yet, almost every door that we knock, every town hall that we have, the constituents are asking us the question, where does the money go? Please know we're not being critical of what the agencies have done in times past. They have operated on lean dollars. We're not being critical of the past, but we believe that as we begin to move forward, and some of you have been at my tax reform seminars. We're going to do a complete tax reform interim study this fall. If we're looking at the money that's coming in, we need to be looking at the money that's going out. We were elected to serve the people of this great state. And so as we continue that reform, we believe it's very responsible on our part now to take a deep dive back into the agencies themselves and their expenditures. The public holds us responsible. We accept that responsibility. Work together to determine whatever those core needs are. Work together to find those fiscal solutions that are out there. And work together for a better government that is going to serve the people. And in the process, we'll have opportunity for that reform by either eliminating programs that need to be eliminated instead of maybe just starving them to death, or find those that are inefficient and work together. The bill that we are talking about this morning is a bill that will basically line item all agencies that receive more than $100 million a year. The question comes, why don't we do all agencies? We understand those that receive more than $100 million a year is about 88.7% of our overall appropriated budget. If you look at our top 12 agencies, that's 93% of our budget. Now, on the list of those agencies, there are one that we cannot line item, and that is the State Regents for Higher Education constitutionally, and they received $810 million this last year. Other agencies, the State Department of Education, a little over $2.4 billion. The Healthcare Authority at $991 million. The Department of Human Services, $651 million. Department of Corrections, almost $485 million. Department of Mental Health, Substance Abuse, $324.8 million. Department of Transportation, from the appropriated, $154.9 million. And Department of Career and Technology Education, $118 million. And so as we move forward in this bill, and we have some others that you've noticed have already signed on to the bill, I think it puts the responsibility back on us to move forward in line iteming these budgets. I want to say once again that this used to be the practice in this building before 2008, and 2009 was the last time that we have seen this here. And we believe it's time to bring this back to government, and time to be involved in these agencies all during the interim, and time to find out their core needs, and then be with them in writing the budgets. We believe that's what's responsible back toward the people. Senator Griffin.
do want to add just a couple of things regarding work with state agencies. Legislators are responsible for appropriately funding the things that we ask those agencies to do. You saw just this morning in the potential lawsuit by Oklahoma City Public Schools that one of the things that they have mentioned is the failure of the legislature to fund things that are required by law. If you read the particular wording of the statute, that would also be a requirement on the legislature. If we place things into law that cost money, it would be the responsibility of the legislature to fund those activities. The desire of this group is to open the dialogue, to disrupt the budget process that we have currently, so that the agencies that are operating the programs that our citizens demand are doing so with adequate funding. That does not necessarily mean increased funding. The word adequate implies that we are paying for what we are asking them to do. The other thing that we do want to work on, as Senator Thompson mentioned, is the discontinuation of things that don't work. And in order for that to happen, the dialogue between elected officials and the hardworking Oklahomans that are serving Oklahoma's citizens every single day has to be a back and forth dialogue. Our culture right now is one of blame. They want to blame us, we want to blame them. What we're attempting to do is to change that culture to a culture of collaboration, of mutual benefit, and to place the needs of our citizens first and foremost so that our government is working for those that we desire to serve. Thank you all very much for being here, for your interest in this.
Will there be any questions from anyone this morning? They are under performance review, and if you go back and look at it, some of those are, we get the numbers that they would give to us. We look at some of the performance. Some of those are every 4 years, some of them is every year that comes in. And what I believe that we need to do is that we as legislators need to be digging in. We were elected by the people to be able to do that. They give us their numbers. We look at the overview, if you will, of those numbers. We need to dig deep. We need to be able to go back into my district and they say, why are we funding education at $2.4 billion? Where's the money go? Where's that money go? And we need to be able to give that answer. That's our responsibility.
What led to the change in 2009?
One of the things that led to the change, the budgets began to be very hard to come by. Deficits were somewhat there. And my understanding, I was not here in 2009, was to give more flexibility to the agencies to spend the money that they were appropriated.
Given the lack of flexibility that we see this past legislative session, won't this cause the same problem?
I appreciate the question. It's a good question. One of the things that we begin to see, though, is over the last 3 years since I've been here, and that's all I can speak to, is that our answer has simply been, let's give more and more and more money. And we don't satisfy that. And as Senator Griffin talked about, we want to give adequate funding for that, but we need to know what that's about. Number one, we cannot begin that on February the 1st. We're going to have to begin this in the interim. And subcommittee chairs out working in those agencies, dealing with those agencies, and believing in those agencies so that we understand what adequate funding is going to be about. The second part of that is today so many of our funds are tied into federal funds. You've read in the news and heard on the television that even if a cut goes into effect, we're 1 to 2, 1 to 4, and on federal funds, and especially what we're talking about now, the minus $215 million. So we need, as legislators, to be aware that every dollar that's appropriated, what is that leverage in federal funds? And if we cut that back, what's going to happen to us on the federal fund side as well?
How's this new strategy going to impact the ever-looming special session that is probably going to happen this fall?
Will not impact that special session if it is called. This bill has been filed. When we come back in February, hopefully the bill will be heard, and we'll be able to work it through both houses. Hopefully the governor will sign it, so it'll be impacting the next legislative year if that's the case.
Have you heard from Democratic colleagues about being part of the process? They've been talking about, they were critical of Republicans for not being part of the budget process. What do you say to that?
I have, on this particular bill, I have talked to some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. They seem to be somewhat supportive of this. Getting into the budget process, I'm not a part of that process, and the negotiations that have been there, so I can't speak to that.
The key word here seems to be transparency.
Yes.
But you're talking about how you're not allowed to be
A very good question. There is a time for us to be able to talk. And so what is that we're looking for? What we need to agree upon? What kind of money are we looking at? The leaders of both chambers and executive branch have been chosen, and they have been very good to come back to us. The main thing that we're wanting, Aaron, is make sure that if we come back here in a special session, we're not costing a bunch of taxpayer money, that we know what's going on at that particular time. And when we get back into the bill that we're here to talk about today, it does bring a great deal of transparency to that process.
Just to follow up, there were a lot of questions in terms of he said, she said last session. We don't know because we were not inside those meetings. Only 30 certain select people were inside those meetings. Couldn't we alleviate those and open up more transparency by allowing the press in?
Well, again, it's just my opinion. Other senators may want to respond as well. I think there is a time that you need to sit down as those who are looking over the numbers and say, where do we go with this? Where are your members? What can we do with this? And those need to be, I believe, into a situation where that you're free and you're open to talk and to do that. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Well, I want to add that this helps significantly. You know, our process right now means that sub-appropriations committee chairs work with agencies all year long. We know the numbers, we know the budgets, and then we roll out the big numbers at the end of the session. And a lot of that work that went into the detailed budget, you know, many of you may not be aware that the Senate passed a budget limit bill on the Department of Human Services that wasn't taken up in the House of Representatives, that would have alleviated a lot of the tension that occurred after the session. By requiring the legislature to do what we should be doing anyway, and that's been one of the questions. We can already do this, but we don't. So the goal is to disrupt the process, to make it more detailed, to require the legislature, all of the sitting members, to be more involved, detailed with the detail of the budget. This can help significantly. If we know that we have to follow up the general appropriations bill with detailed budgets for our largest state agencies, everyone has to be engaged in the budget process much earlier in the session. And that's the goal, which creates transparency. Committee meetings are open to the press, and subcommittee meetings are announced committee meetings as well. So it would innately just open up the process and get not only the sitting members more involved in the process, but create a more transparent budgeting process. As for your question on should the press be allowed in the budget negotiations at the end of the session, I have not ever participated in those myself. I don't know. I don't know how that would work because I haven't been privy to those conversations.
As I said in my opening remarks, I'm not here to be critical of what we've done in times past. What I'm saying is we need to be engaged in what's going on, and more so. And so if your subcommittee chairs are engaged and they decide that instead of buying textbooks this year, we're going to give flexibilities back to the particular agency, then this time being the state school board, then that would be that decision they would reach after a thorough investigation. And they would be so convinced of that, they'd come back and convince us of the same thing. We don't know that if we don't take a deep dive ourselves with those agencies. Today, whenever that we deal with agencies that come in, they show us what their budget's going to be, they ask us to vote on it, we answer directly at those doors, we answer directly on the steps, we answer directly at town halls. Where does that money go? And so we pick up these agencies, make over $100 million. Let's find out where it goes. Let's be a part of the process. That's why we were sent here to do.
Is there a fiscal impact factor as well? Will this create more bureaucracy?
My quick answer on that, Aaron, is no. It should not, because all of us are already elected. We're already receiving our pay to be here. And it is our responsibility, our duty to do what we do. I would not be in favor, and I've not been asked, of hiring additional staff or anyone else to go do our job for us. This is our job. And I've tried to do that since I've been here. A number of other people try to do that. And we must be the ones that's responsible.
I'm hearing the words required by law, and of course, Senator Griffin mentioned we can do this already. There's nothing stopping anyone from doing it. And so I'm curious, we can do it already. What is forcing the future legislators to do that, which a lot of times they'll say you can't tie the hands of the future legislators. And there's already things in the budget such as education first, requiring lawmakers to have a budget for education by April 1st, which hasn't been followed out. I'm just wondering, how are we going to make sure that any legislator does this ever?
Okay.
Even though we're going to pass a law.
Very, very good question. If you notice in Senate Bill 875, that on line 20, the legislator shall present measures. Not an option, but shall. And having the option and then creating a pathway are two different avenues. We want to take the avenue that requires legislators to physically get involved.
So it just changes the law to require them to do it rather than making it an option.
Yes.
What if this legislation prevents the pro tem speaker, governor, Larry Nichols from drafting budget deals also?
Thank you for the question. Whenever that we look at how we're going to get to those numbers, we'll get to those numbers by the deep dive into those agencies that receive over $100 million. Of course, these subcommittee chairs will bring those numbers back to the appropriation chairs, and then ultimately the leadership of both houses, the governor, the executive branch, will work on those numbers at the end. We need to be involved in that process all the way through, and so if we are sure of the numbers where we are, we hand that off to the leaders. They can take those same numbers and go forward. We can stand behind our numbers. Certainly not usurping any authority at any level.
Talking about budgets and state agencies, both DHS and Oklahoma City Public Schools have said that they're hurting for dollars. Yet the speaker has said they need to live within their means and sort of criticize the leadership. Is that a fair assessment?
No comment on DHS.
Go ahead.
Okay. First of all, I'm not going to speak for anybody but for us or for me, and certainly not for the speaker. For me to be able to say they need to live within their means, I need to know what their means are. I need to know where every dollar is being spent. They receive more than $100 million, we ought to know that. And they really ought to be involved in that process. For me not to know, personally, where every dollar is being spent, it makes it very difficult for me to say they're misusing funds or overspending in any particular area. This bill requires us to get involved at that level, which we were elected to do.
So what level of detail are you really talking about? I mean, how many pages do you anticipate of detail in, say, like a DHS document, a line item?
Okay. Senator Bice?
Thank you. I've actually done a little bit of research on this, and in past years when they've been sort of either budget limit or line item bills, you're talking about 150 pages worth of documentation that really kind of details every specific category where those funds could be spent. So it could be a significant amount of work on fiscal staff, which I think goes to your question earlier. But I think it's necessary, and it helps us get that visibility and transparency on where the money's going. Fiscal staff's being paid regardless, so no, I don't see any increase in cost.
Do you feel this legislation will impact the last moments of the budget negotiation or the Senate negotiation where budgets discussed session?
Of this next session?
Yeah.
Of course, as I said before, we'll be debating this bill in the next session, and then will take effect the next fiscal year that's out there. I am positive that as this bill moves forward after this press conference, that there's going to be a lot of agencies interested in talking. And quite frankly, since I've been here, some agencies are not interested in talking to their representatives or to their senators because they're already getting their appropriations. I understand in this bill, and at one particular time, talking to some of the senators who have retired and gone on, that if an agency head received a phone call from any representative or senator, we got the director's attention. Today, that's not always the case. And I'm confident, as the legislature gets back involved in this process, that it's going to be good for the people of Oklahoma. That's what we were elected to serve, the people of Oklahoma.
Is that the reason for this press conference? Or is that question?
No, it is not. The reason for this press conference is to let everyone know that we take our responsibility very seriously. And as I said in opening remarks, I have been involved in a deep dive into taxes, where our taxes are coming from today, how they're spent. Involved in tax reform. Well, if we're working on the taxpayer side and we're asking for more money or less money or to redo the way we structure our taxes, we must be equally responsible on the spending side. We must be able to give answers the same way. That's the reason for this bill. That's the reason for the press conference today.
If I can follow up.
Yes.
And if I can follow up, I think oftentimes the comments are made to legislators, well, you're only working on the budget 4 months out of the year. Well, the reality is it's not true. I mean, we're constantly working on apportionment reform, tax reform, and this is sort of another layer of that we can be doing prior to next session to really prepare.
And I want to add as well, Our process this last several sessions has been when we need to make reductions, we do apply a percentage across the board. We do a 2.5% reduction to a particular agency. Well, that's, as a vote, that's fairly easy to stomach. But if we're doing our job and we understand the budget of that agency, it's not a 2.5% reduction. It's elimination of a particular service category, or it's the reduction of a particular service to a disabled individual or to the classroom. The other goal is to personalize and to make sure that, as legislators, our deeply held commitment to ensuring that our government is functional actually plays out in the way that we do our work as appropriators, and that we understand that we're not funding an agency. We're funding services for Oklahomans, so that we're taking that reduction or increase very seriously, and we can justify it on the doorstep to the people that are paying the bill.
That's what I was going to say. In 2009, this stuff, putting in line items was because they didn't realize what you were cutting. You were just cutting the Department of Education. You were cutting a certain textbook. You were cutting a lunch. You were cutting something. This puts a lot more pressure on lawmakers. Do you think that they're going to want to do something like this when it comes time to vote for a bill like this?
I think that a significant number of our colleagues are ready to take on that challenge.
Thank you all very much for being here today. We appreciate your attendance, and if you have further questions, we'd be more than happy to talk to you. 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 Be more than happy to talk to you.